Okay, we should be live now.
All right.
You want to bring it up? I will too.
Yeah, pull it up so we can see comments.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually have like a computer now, so I don't have to be looking at comments from the phone.
So, Sub F, Nathan is my guest tonight. Was just sort of in the mood to hang out and talk Pokemon. Thought it would be the new format, I guess, we're doing for a lot of these is we just have like a discussion topic of sorts that we start with. Tonight it is, what did I say? It's mistakes and or surprises. So things that like mistakes you've made, in the past year or even earlier on when you were starting, things that you kind of, you know, either big mistakes or kind of like, small minor mistakes. And or we can also talk about just things that surprised you about this year, prices, certain items that surprised you, either going very high that surprised you or being low that surprised you that you weren't expecting. And then as people come in, I also would love to hear from people in the chat, mistakes or things that surprised them. And it should be a good talk. And then depending on how long that lasts, and you can ask questions or make comments, guys, related to that sort of topic, then we will transition and probably do a little bit of, depending on times, a bit of just general Q&A, Pokemon market questions, any sort of questions people have. Sound good, Nate?
Yep, sounds good to me.
So those who don't know Nate, experienced TCG collector, collects a lot of TCGs. Also has you are full-time now as a business as well. Correct, Nate? Or
I still work a full-time job, so I'm doing it on the side right now, but I'm planning to be full-time business soon.
Cool. So someone who does a lot of business, a lot of buying and selling, has been doing it for a long time, has experience in a number of different TCGs. Pokemon, your main TCG, Weiss, a close second, or both equal?
Pokemon's my main TCG. I
Yeah,
do like Weiss quite a bit, and
yeah,
also I enjoy playing Yu-Gi-Oh!
yeah, and
Uh,
you, yeah,
yeah, so those are the three ones that I watch quite a bit.
yeah, nice. So for those who don't know, Nate's a wealth of knowledge, and also just very like friendly, and will, if you have questions for him here or other places, he's always kind of open to answer, give his opinion. He's not afraid to be opinionated and say it fairly bluntly, which I appreciate. It's nice. Um, so I guess to start, Nate, tell us about any mistakes or things that surprised you from the last year or your entire experience in the hobby.
From the last year, I would say I made some mistakes by being a little bit too cautious, I think, and sometimes. Uh, so for instance, when like some of the new promos came out at Pokemon Center, like just they came out and they were, $30, $40 out the gate, and it just felt too high of an entry point for me, so I skipped out on it. And I think I definitely missed out on some like good potential profit there, but I don't regret it or anything, because during that time I kept thinking that Pokemon was just a little bit too high for like brand new stuff out the gate, and I was diversifying into other games. So I'm still very happy with what I ended up doing. And I think another mistake that I made this year was maybe underestimating the CGC turnaround times. Around like February, I sent in a pretty large submission, and their estimated date was supposed to come back June. And I was expecting it to take maybe like 3 or 4 months longer than their estimated date. But it ended up taking more like 4.5 to 5 months. So I missed the Christmas season for those. And looking back, it may have been better just to sell those raw. But overall, there hasn't been too much. Like, yeah, you could have made more money buying, crazy NFTs or MetaZoo, but I'm very happy with how the year went and where I'm right now with both investing and collecting.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Overall, I definitely have more, maybe a little bit more to say on the surprise part. Um, on this channel, I've talked about mistakes that I made earlier on in Pokemon, like my first couple of years, and some things that I learned. As far as like this past year, there are always opportunities that you miss. There are always things. There are things that I put money into that if I'd allocated that money somewhere else, I'd have a more valuable collection or I'd have more money. I don't just work on like trying to make the most money. I'm also trying to build the collection that I really like and enjoy. So it's not all just about, the stonkage.
Yeah.
but because I also do sell, and because I sell to kind of fund me continuing to build up my collection and kind of meet my goals there. I think the area that I wish I had gone more into is the Pikachu promos in general. I didn't. I have all of the Stonkage Pikachu promos and some of each, and I went pretty heavy on the screams. And I went decently into the like the poncho Pikachu's and the the EV ponchos and all that sort of stuff. But I did not go, like, I didn't buy much of anything else outside of that. So like the Mario Luigi stuff, just one of each, one of those. And I didn't do a lot of like the Kanazawa and like I don't even remember all the names, but you've got, the different, I think I have like one of like the Easter Pikachu. I have one of the, like some of those Sailor Pikachus. You probably know the names. I don't even know the exact names of all of them, but, and then I did buy a decent amount of the, also the non full art Poncho Pikachu cards, like a number of
Mhm.
those cards. And the reason I didn't go that heavy into them was they just seemed, for me as a collector, at like $30 to $50 at that point, which now is like seems really super cheap. A lot of these cards are now like $300 in PSA 10, $500 in PSA 10, even 1,000 in PSA 10, depending on which one we're talking about. Uh, at the time, I just didn't like them as much as I liked like WotC first edition PSA 9 hollows from a lot of sets. And they were about the same price point. And so I more just kind of got like one of each. And then a few that I really liked, I bought more of. But I guess that was a mistake from a financial sense, because although I've like quadrupled my money or 5x my money on a lot of those WotC Hollow First Edition promos, some of those Pikachu things have like 30x'd and just like crazy stonk age. Now I did stonk out on Top Zone and a bunch of the other Japanese promos and the Level X and the Diamond or Pearl into Black and White era. A lot of things from there, but I'm still, I don't understand why they're so expensive, but I've come to terms with like I get it. I I said I didn't understand, but actually I do get it. Like these cards are beautiful. Pikachu's, you know, a humongous favorite. There are tons of people who just collect Pikachu promos. And even though there are a lot of tens of these cards, many, many hundreds of tens, people just really like them. And I'm not sure, and the stonkage on those doesn't feel like what the hell to me. It feels like I get it. Like I wasn't expecting it, but I get it. So I guess that was something that surprised me, and maybe the one mistake, the one thing that I wish I'd bought a little bit more of all of that.
Yeah, I would say that also surprised me. I think so. I started out with anywhere from, for most of the ponchos I had maybe 10 to 25 copies of. And then for the Pokemon Center promos, I used to buy like anywhere from 100 to 400 of each, depending on uh, how much I liked the card.
Yeah.
But how high the prices went surprised me enough that I have offloaded like a very significant amount. Like I think I maybe have like one or two of each poncho left just for personal collection, a signed one and a non-signed one. But they were all high enough where, a lot of them went to like 1,000, 1,500. Mario, Luigi, Pikachu's went for, I think it's close to like 8 or 10K for the set, which there were just other things that I wanted to buy at that point. So sold them and diversified into other things that did very well.
I'm
Um,
surprised how much people like modern, like that type of modern stuff compared to also like the vintage promo counterparts. So, for example, like the older Pikachu promos, like we could take McDonald's or like these things went up a lot too, but I would have expected those, like more people to want those as like the vintage stuff than, and people just didn't seem to care. Like those were rare, those were low, those were, harder to get in high grade, more historic, connected to something like McDonald's, just for example, like a card like that. And yet it seemed like, and stood out a little bit more to me, and yet it seemed like some of the newer stuff was the ones that people were moving to. Now, the Poncho Pikachus, the Scream Pikachu, I just personally really like them so much. That's why I bought a number of them. I just like they just felt really cool and unique to me. And personally, I guess I got lucky in the sense that I really liked those or happened to understand and really enjoy those. It'll be interesting to see how those things do over time. But I guess I think I've always been more of a set collector when it comes to like not very rare stuff. And so I just always gravitated more towards like, and thought other people would gravitate more towards completing like Jungle, Fossil, Neo before they would buy, like they would spend like $1,000 on a PSA 10 first edition holo from Jungle before they'd spend $1,000 on like like on a card that was given out for $1 very recently, or people were buying for $10 a little bit ago, mint, and then there's influencers and people and lots of people, including you and I mean, I probably had 30 or 40 or 50 of a lot of these, not as much as you had one to 500 or some other guys, but who just knew that you could source those mint all day for $10 each. Whereas you couldn't find PSA 10 quality first edition WotC holos for those types of prices. And it was so hard to get those that the historicness, the difficulty to acquire, the difficulty to open and then grade, it was surprising to me, and still is.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I did sell like a majority of my position in most of them.
Yeah.
I still probably have like a couple hundred of different various Pikachus, but um, I think one of the reasons why people enjoy it so much is because it's tied to the Pokemon Center, and
Mm.
having ponchos that are still being released gets a lot of people in the door. And then once they're in the door, they start seeing about what they can do to collect the set. So some of the things that have slightly lower prints, like the box ponchos, so like the Charizard, Magikarp, Gyarados, Rayquaza, Pikachu's,
Yeah.
Mario, Luigi, those have lower print runs than the normal Pokemon Center promos, which get given out by tens and 20,000s. So I think that's why those ended up going relatively high. And even a lot of the Pokemon Center ones, like when I originally was buying them around like 2016, 2017, I was getting them for about $6 to $12 each, depending on which one it was and how much quantity I wanted to buy. Because the more you buy, the higher you have to pay,
Yeah.
because there's only so much available on the market at a time. So
Yeah. Yeah. I
those
mean, it's
those went
definitely
up
been
to
a
a couple
learning.
hundred.
That's been a learning experience. I would say the other learning experience is, and I don't know if this is ever going to be replicable, but just what happened with like modern booster boxes was interesting to watch in general. And then seeing, which ones ballooned the most, understanding how connected that was to demand versus print run. it was surprising. So it wasn't surprising to me that every booster box went above $300 from the Sun and Moon era. That was not surprising to me. It was surprising to me which ones went up the most a little bit, and then also the rate of it and which ones people chose was a little surprising to me. I think because I was in the hobby in that era, I would have thought that something like Burning Shadows would have been a little bit higher because of like the Rainbow Rare Charizard. Obviously, it's very difficult to pull that card. There are all sorts of grading problems. There weren't a lot of different cards that people want from that set. That type of stuff kept it down. And then the whole breaking movement exploding, I think, is something, I'm not sure surprising is the right word, but I learned a lot because that whole thing has become a market. It's very much changed the landscape of what booster box, like a booster box being fun to open and to be fun, and that your patrons can hit a lot of hits, has like the value of that has gone up versus what it used to be, as well. So I think that market, I feel like I'm learning more, and some things sort of surprise me, or as far as like mistakes I feel like I made within that, that's one that I feel fine not doing. And all the money that I would have put into that, I've done equally well in the stuff that I bought at that time. But versus the Ponchu Pikachus, where if I had put more into that, that would have gone up more than what I was buying at the time, if that makes sense for everyone out there. So from that like mistake standpoint, as far as like buying something that's gone down, I've been extremely lucky. And to be fair, like I do just a ton of research, and I always buy way under market. So I think I have one card right now that's worth less than what I bought it for potentially, and the lowest on eBay is $1,000 over what I paid for it. But the last one sold a couple $100 under what I bought it for, and that's my Clefable PSA 10 first edition Jungle, which I bought in the last few months. So, how about you? Have you bought anything, or do you own anything that you bought and has retraced?
There's definitely been some stuff. Let me think. Some of the sealed Japanese, like Knight Unison, what is this? Jet Black Geist and Silver Lance. That was a Japanese set that I bought that I was expecting to do better. In that set for a while. I don't think it's retraced any, but it hasn't gone up any. In terms of singles, I haven't bought a ton of like Pokemon singles this year. I did buy a few trophies, and unfortunately I bought them from Japan. So by the time that it got here, there were a couple, like I bought a PSA 9 Master Key that when it got here, I wasn't super happy with the condition. It was probably closer to like a PSA 8.
You took the gamble.
Yeah, which I paid 20K on it, like 21 after fees, which is fine. But when I sell it, I will probably lose a little bit of money on it. I think it's more of there was a lot of stuff that I didn't buy that went up, but now a lot of it's gone back down below like what I would have paid anyways. So I'm pretty satisfied with where I am in Pokemon. I was really surprised at how long modern boxes and singles stayed up in like the 200-300 price range. Like coming from being in Pokemon for, see, I joined in 2015. Realistically, the only set that stayed significantly high from that time was Roaring Skies, and that was because it was short printed, and then Shaman was used in every single deck. So those boxes were like 150, 200, but every other box.
And then Ultra Prism had got to like $120, which was like a huge deal when it did early on.
Yeah, I remember when that was a huge surprise.
I remember when Breakthrough got to $100, and that was like a really huge deal because none of those sets had even moved like an inch at all. and there was no one, that I knew at least that was, investing in that type of product. It was more for flipping, if you could get a pretty good deal and make some margin, and people sort of enjoying opening it. So this whole like investing in modern, holding sealed product, putting cases away, and then them going up like 4 or 5 times in 5 years is like a brand new idea, a brand new sort of concept. And we're going to have to see. I mean, one thing that I argued a lot about was, and that I really tried to understand was, what is going on in Magic, and why is that worked decently well in Magic, or for certain sets in Magic? How connected is that to playability, right? And then how is that something that you can really predictably see in Pokemon, or is in Pokemon there, because it isn't that playability part that's causing these sets, at least in this environment, to double in price or what have you? Do people just kind of move on and lose interest in these sets and then move on to the next one, and then we see these kind of go down because it's not about playability, where it's tying the sets together and you need cards from this set to then play with the cards from the next set, you know what I mean? So what happens?
We're going into a topic that I actually have on my list of things that I want to talk about whenever I start my YouTube, but it's comparing the different card games and what affects pricing long-term for sealed and singles. So the difference between Pokemon and Magic is a draftable game, which means after a set is no longer relevant in the competitive scene, you can still open a booster box with friends and basically draft a cube with it. And for those who don't know what drafting is, you basically, however many people you're supposed to draft with, you open packs and you take one card, you pass the card to the left, then you take a second card. So basically each person take turns picking cards from the pack, and you build a deck out of it and you play with it. And so Magic also has a different distribution model, where instead of going through distributors like Pokemon does, they have a direct to brick and mortar store model. So short of some very large buyers like Rudy, most Magic sets go directly to brick and mortar stores. And so I think that also helps a little bit with price. Them taking away MSRP probably also helps a little bit. But Pokemon's fatal flaw has always been that anybody can just, start an LLC and get as much product as they want. Pokemon is also somewhat print to demand. So you can place an order for whatever product you want. And although on the first wave, you may not get your full allocation, Pokemon will print additional waves to fill any need in the market. So these factors really push the price of modern sealed down as low as it can go, because it creates this atmosphere where whoever is willing to survive off of the lowest profit margin is going to sell the highest volume. And that's not super healthy for a TCG. Unfortunately, that's the pricing model we have, but that's also why pre-pandemic, a lot of the sets would go 5 years with zero price movement. So although there was a lot of opportunity and profit to be made during the pandemic, I'm still very happy that I didn't go into English sealed.
Yeah. I don't know certainly what is going to happen. I wouldn't be shocked if people get too bearish, and then in 6 months to a year from now, some of these sets do go to $120, because there's still a lot of stonkishness and there's still a lot of like investors hoarding it. But the way that it ends up working with some of the negativity that it bounces back up, I wouldn't be shocked if it just sits at $80, $90 for many years. It's to me, it's uncharted territory in a lot of ways. And I think it's part of why I'd like to hear your opinion on this, Nate, but part of why I was a little irked by all the arguments about how like this has happened before, like we know what's going to happen. You'll see on every video that Rudy makes talking positively about Pokemon, someone or like 20 people in the comment section will say, Pokemon, every Pokemon box has gone up over time. So you just need to buy it and hold it and throw it in a closet. And it's like guaranteed money. And it's like, these types of things, these types of very in-depth analysis, trying to figure out where's the best place to put your money. It's understanding how we got here with Sun and Moon product, X and Y product, and then trying to figure out, is that replicable? Or are we going to enter a 15, 20-year period where maybe booster boxes are fairly printed demand, and demand never really spikes that much higher. And so there's just no movement at all for a very long time. It's or it just gets saturated with too many sets, and then people aren't interested in revisiting these sets. There's a lot of questions that I just don't think there's any real data. And I think there's tons of reasonable opinions, and there are tons of reasonable bullish opinions in my perspective, from my opinion too. It's just sort of unknown.
Yeah, I think Pokemon, if you're looking super long term like Rudy, like he doesn't care if it sits for 5 years or for 10 years. If that's your mindset, then buying Pokemon sealed now, that's fine as an investment. But the majority of people, you don't necessarily want to get in, at the lowest, because a lot of people don't have infinite capital. So instead of buying for $80 a box right now, I could wait 5 years and buy it for $90 a box. And it's a much better way for me to use my capital, because I can put it towards something else right now. Also, 80 to 90 in 5 years is really not a great ROI. So, but Pokemon also has the downside of rotations, and that will also affect pricing, because the EV for booster box is always going to be the highest on release. And then once the rotation happens, the EV, which is expected value, tanks, because the playability isn't there if you don't have it for standard. And although there is some sort of playability for expanded, which is another competitive Pokemon format that goes from black and white and on, usually there's much more powerful cards, so a lot of the singles don't retain the sort of value that like Magic the Gathering singles do with their like 5 or 6 different formats. So with Pokemon, you're kind of fighting those two humps. First, the dip on release, and then you're fighting the dip once a set rotates. So I think that's also one of the reasons why it takes Pokemon sets, 4 to 5 years usually before you start to see it go up. So that's usually my benchmark though. I think most of the sets that I've bought, I've waited about 4 years, maybe 5, but I usually keep an ear with the distributors, and when I hear that they start to sell out, then I'll start buying positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maximizes your chance. Like, I think that there are larger factors of just like how globally popular is Pokemon that's extremely difficult to predict and is going to play a humongous part in all of that. So, for example, adults collecting Pokemon cards absolutely roaring and booming and 10xing in size during a period is more responsible for what happened, in my opinion, with modern product and everything else than is like this 5-year rule. Like if that had happened in 2 to 3 years. Now, this idea of like, when you're talking about like smaller margins, like not tripling, quadrupling, 5xing your money, like more realistic, reasonable stuff, it's very sensible to be like, okay, like let's wait till something's out of print, for a while. Let's wait till people sort of, forget about it. Maybe it starts to become a little bit boring, and all of that kind of, happens at around the same time. And so I can get in at, $10 lower. And I think we're, much closer to it becoming and people revisiting the set or being interested. And that I feel like there isn't that much out there. And I'm seeing booster breakers trying to open it again and people kind of wanting to revisit the set. And, there's like a lot of that sort of stuff. Like that is very sensible in making an extra 20% or 30% and or saving 5 years of no growth, as you put it, to get in at $10 less. I think, Rudy's obviously made some videos on this, which are always fun that stand out to me on just like this idea of should I what's a cost dollar average, or oh my, am I saying that wrong? That feels wrong. Whatever. The point being that I'm gonna average my starting cost by sort of buying continuously every few months versus I make humongous purchases like right at that point that makes the most sense. I think is an interesting conversation. I think I'm a little bit of both. I mean, when I can get booster boxes for like $70, I'm gonna buy some. $72, I'm gonna buy some, even in this climate right now. Particularly, I like these sets. Like, I don't think these are bad sets. I think both of these sets, like Chilling Reign and Battle Styles, are better than the majority of the Sun and Moon sets that are now $300 to $400. So for me, I think the full arts are much better than the Sun and Moon era, even just the regular full arts. And I like, some of these alternative arts quite a bit. So yeah, I think a lot of the negativity is sort of unwarranted. I also don't think these should be $150, $200 products. I think $80, $90 product, is a good price for these. And maybe they'll go to $120, 130, 140, 150, maybe in a few years, that type of thing.
Yeah, and my 5-year rule, it's not like hard set or anything. That's why you keep an eye out on the market and you make that determination. But from my experience, it's been roughly 5 years if you don't count the pandemic growth. But I also don't think Sun and Moon would be anywhere near 300 if we didn't have the pandemic clear out a lot of it back inventory.
Yeah.
Uh, but I will say I do like our current sets more than the Sun and Moon era, just because of the alternate arts. I think those are so good.
So one thing people are talking about is the ETBs, which I do think is an interesting topic. What do you make, Nate? Do you have an opinion on ETBs, but also like Pokemon Center ETBs versus, and then maybe some of these like, mega collections that are lower printed? Do you believe that those items are going to have, more demand or special demand because they're different products than the booster box, even though there are less packs? And, this whole debate, do you have an opinion one way or another on this stuff?
I do, and I guess I'll kind of talk about a couple different parts of it. I do think that they will have an easier time growing in value than booster boxes, but the downside is going to be your storage and your shipping. The reason that I don't carry any of them unless it's for personal collection is because with shipping ETBs, you basically have to use priority mail due to the size and weight, and that increases your shipping. It's basically the same shipping as a booster box, which is not great when your item is only, $35 to $40 on release. Like, you need to see much more growth to be able to even off those, so your risk is much higher. Like, if you ever become to a point where you're illiquid and you need to liquidate, it's much harder to liquidate a position in ETBs than a position in booster boxes. Uh, and with the collection boxes, they look great, but USPS is just not reliable, and that is currently our cheapest shipping option. So when you ship those and the boxes get damaged, if anyone is buying them for collection, which, if you're buying a position and investing in it, by the time that the price goes up to a point where you want to sell, people are going to be collecting them, not opening them. And I think it's just too much liability in shipping damage to confidently sell those and invest in them. Like, I'd rather just hold booster boxes at that point. If you did like conventions or a storefront and you had infinite storage space, like if you were in the Midwest, had a warehouse and you just didn't really care about the space to store things, you could consider it. But for most people, storing those things at a house, like for the EV collections, for instance, if you wanted to store 20 of each of those, that's probably a closet in your house that's just gone. So it's just too much storage space, and shipping is too much of a pain for for me to invest in those at least.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to see how much better those have done, particularly in like the Sun and Moon era and certain XY ones than the booster boxes, both on a percentage basis, but there are also ETBs that are more expensive than the booster box, offsetting the concept of like, well, but shipping costs the same, so it doesn't make sense there. But that may be a very specific thing to that Sun and Moon era versus like in this era where it's possible the amount of ETBs being created. I mean, obviously for a set like Celebrations or sets where there are no booster box, that's completely separate. But sets where there are ETBs or a booster box type option, a good one to look at it right now is like Evolving Skies, because I think, with the EVs on it, I think English, there are different people will debate, well, the ETBs look better, on a shelf, the booster boxes look terrible. I've also heard, which I thought was like generally the consensus, although now I'm hearing a lot of pushback from certain people who are like, no, I think the ETBs are bad and the booster boxes look good. So whatever. I have no idea how that conversation will how people decide those things over time. Everyone's got an opinion, but
Yeah, I will say for ETBs, if I was going to invest in them, I would pick up like the special sets. So
Yeah.
like Hidden Fates, Shining Fates. EV Heroes is an exception because it features the EVs. So I think those are fine, but I'd still rather just commit the space to something else. There's just so much in our hobby that you can invest in, so you kind of have to pick and choose where you want to invest. And I'm just not that much of a fan of ETBs, but I'm also pretty limited by space. I'm not in New York or anything, but it's still something to consider because I do hold quite a bit of sealed of other sets. So
I think the sealed collector too, to understand like what does that look like and what percentage of the hobby is a sealed collector who wants sort of one of everything, or these types of people, or I'm seeing some people, it feels like very, very few people, but they want like every like diamond and pearl era, like, black and white era, like specialty box and tin. And it's like, and some of them just really hard to find like every single one. And so they're just paying humongous premiums on certain items when you factor in, if you just think of it like how many packs do you get in this versus the booster box. And so I think one thing is like, will that ever happen for anything? It's something that people speculate on. I don't really know. A lot of that will have to do, in my opinion, with how does sealed collecting look like over time, and then the most important thing, the rarity of these items. So how, if you're looking at if there's a specific set and they released like 7 different types of potential items for that, and one of them happens to be like very low printed where they don't do the printing again, to me, you get in a little bit of dangerous territory when you're paying humongous premiums for different colored boxes, and you're moving farther and farther away from like the packs and the contents of the packs. I get it on one level because the sealed collector wants like every different version, but like if you're paying $5,000 for 4 packs, or $5,000 or like $6,000 for 25 packs, it just becomes a harder and harder. I'm just throwing out random numbers, but it becomes a harder and harder thing, I think, to justify for me.
yeah, I think also for sealed collectors, a lot of people start really gung ho and, I want to buy every single sealed product that there is out there. And when you can start with that with modern, but once you start looking into older things, or even once you start collecting for, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and more products are released, the amount of space you have to commit is very high. So I see a lot of sealed collectors, and maybe they start out with collection boxes and then they move to, just ETBs and booster boxes. Sometimes they stick with just ETBs. But over time, sealed collecting, I think, changes quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think breaking also will be interesting to watch because nobody breaks ETBs unless it's a special set. Uh, Everyone who does breaking is going to break stuff like booster boxes. It just makes more sense. You're getting just the packs. So that also may affect long-term pricing.
For sure. Both there, and there's a positive argument that those booster boxes are more valuable because the breakers can buy them and break them, but there's also that the other side, which is that they're opening a lot more of that, and so there are going to be less of those booster boxes left. And where that plays out, you know um I don't know. um we do have a super chat here, Seneca, that I missed a while ago. It says, they ask, will Japanese no symbol from base set ever be looked at in the same regard as first edition Shadowless, or is it just due to being the English audience hype? What's your opinion? This is a very purely opinionated thing. Nobody knows. And anyone who comes
Yeah.
out and says, this is what it's going to be like is full of it. that's my
Well,
answer. But
well, everything we talk about on here is, well, not everything, but the majority of what we talk on here is pretty opinionated.
I would say it's various levels of facts, data, and objectivity mixed with opinion. This would be something where, like, how do you predict, do people care about no rarity accurately in 10 years and how much they care about it versus first edition? I mean, we can certainly debate the merits, but go ahead,
Yeah.
Nate.
So my personal opinion is that English first edition will always be king in terms of popularity. I think mainly because it's so easy to differentiate it. The first edition stamp is one of the easier things to teach someone. There are people who will buy it because they can see the first edition stamp and they have no idea what shadowless is, even though they're technically buying a card that is shadowless by definition. Um, with Japanese no rarity, first of all, there's not as much of it out there. Like, we know the English first edition print run was more than 10,000 boxes. So you're looking at, at a minimum, you're looking at like around 8,000 of each hollow, um, probably more. But for first edition or for Japanese no rarity, we're not really sure on the print run, but there's not a ton of it out there that we see pop up. Part of that might just be, people don't know that they have it. You do have to be in the game for a while to even look for the no rarity, and then you still have the learning curve of figuring out why some like structure deck or theme deck cards don't have a rarity symbol, some promos don't have it. So it's not even just learning that base set no rarity. I see people post all the time in like Burbank and whatnot, where they'll post like something from like the Sabrina deck and say, I found this no rarity card. Is it worth money? Um, but another barrier with no rarity is buying it, especially from Japan. There's so many listings that you'll see on like Yahoo Auctions or Mercari where you can't tell if there's a rarity symbol or not, just because of picture quality or maybe the angle, the lighting. Um, and I think lastly, it's just there's a few people with pretty large positions in no rarity, and so it's not as accessible to the masses, which will make it harder to gain traction. So those are just my opinions.
So I knew one guy who completed the PSA 10 first edition English set and then got bored, sold it all, and went after like the PSA 10 no rarity set, which is very difficult, although now might become a little easier now that they're going to be grading
Raichu and
grading
Venusaur
the
again.
Raichu and the Venusaur again, but was very difficult before. I believe there was one Raichu right before, or Venusaur before. Which one had one?
There was one Raichu, and the guy was
Raichu.
asking like, I think a quarter mil, and then he recently dropped it to like 160K, which is still ridiculous. Like, there are some no rarity cards that sell for absolutely insane prices, in
Yeah.
my opinion. But sometimes you only need two people to make a price. Do I think that some of those like huge prices are going to be replicated consistently? Like, absolutely not. But no rarity has definitely been something that has come up in the last couple years. Even like 3 or 4 years ago, nobody really cared that much. Like, there were no rarity
Yeah.
collectors, but it was, by far few and far between.
I don't have a strong opinion on this, truthfully. Um, I either way, I think that um one thing I think is just really interesting, and the broader conversation around like Japanese or English, and like which way is the hobby moving, which way are we going to go? I I don't have anything to compare this to because I don't have, when I study other older collectible markets, they didn't have, it wasn't a situation where like the bigger market was one area and wanted one language, but the original language market was and to watch those kind of like compete, obviously there's lots of Japanese Pokemon collectors in Japan now. It is a humongous thing. There, TCGs in general have really blown up in Japan. It's a humongous thing right now, but it's still a lot of the big money and a lot more people all around the world you think would go for the English cards, because they want to be able to read it and it's the card that they like grew up with and they're associated with as kids. But are people going to shift as they become sort of more, experienced in the hobby? And I think this generally happens to wanting sort of the original language, to not caring as much about being able to read the card and going more towards rarity. I think that naturally happens. And I think this guy I'm talking about is a great example of that. Immediately wants to get his childhood cards, but once he achieved that goal, it was in his interesting now, and now he wanted to go for the harder goal, which was getting all the PSA 10 or as close to possible and no rarity. So I think that's sort of an interesting thing that happens. You have a lot of modern collectors who are, much more interested in the Japanese cards and and you have SM Pride and you have lots of people like making videos and coming out saying, Japanese sets are much better constructed and much more enjoyable to open and are exclusive and are not reprinted as much. Although all the rules are, I think, a lot of rules have changed and are constantly changing about how much Japanese is going to print stuff. But I don't know. I think that these are, I was picking up lots and lots of like PSA 10 Neo hollows for $10 each. PSA 10 Neo hollows slab for $10, $12, $13, $14, $20, because nobody gave a crap about Japanese and everyone just wanted English. At that point, I would have told you that these are extremely undervalued, right? In this current environment, if I had to pick one, I would probably say the English are more undervalued to a lot of the Japanese movement and the things we've seen in Japanese. But I also I also feel like pretty good about the relative value of a lot of these items. And I think, and I don't know, all these influencer opinions and even all of the current opinions aside, I don't know as a hobby and as a group of people what we're going to like more in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Like I don't know which way we're going to move, and I don't have anything to compare it to historically. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I do think the last thing I'll say specifically, because the question was about no rarity first edition, the first edition stamp is iconic. Not having a no rarity stamp is not iconic, just visually and in and of itself. And so that first edition stamp, particularly the English first edition stamp, is an iconic stamp for any English collector, for anyone who collected as a kid. The no rarity is visually does not hit the same way, I think, for any collector. And I do think that has an impact. And also when you talk about Japanese first edition versus unlimited, when you move out of the sort of the WotC era into E-Series and the original Nintendo EX era, it becomes a lot more strange, because the way Japanese did it is there are sets where there seem to be less unlimited than there are first edition, because they sort of printed for a pretty large first edition set and then printed sort of a little bit more unlimited, because there was a little bit more appetite, but Pokemon was not booming during a lot of those eras. So valuing sort of first edition in Japanese versus unlimited in Japanese is a whole nother interesting concept, which I do think makes Japanese collecting a little bit not as easy or obvious or accessible when we're talking about collecting Japanese in like the E series and in the Neo eras, if that makes sense, Nate. It's a little bit like, do I want the first edition? Do I want all the unlimited? Do I want a mix of both? What am I doing here? Type stuff.
Yeah, I think English definitely has, at least English WotC, uh, definitely has a better identity with the first edition stamp.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people do get into Japanese, but it's once they get, a couple months or pretty deep into research into the hobby that they start looking at some of the promos first usually. There are some Japanese set collectors, but I think sets English is always going to be king. But the mindset for like TCGs in Japan versus America are also very different. Like in the US, I would say a majority of Pokemon fans are either fans of the video game or the cards specifically.
Mm.
But in Japan, because anime and TCGs and you know figures, plushes have or are much widely acceptable in their culture,
Yeah.
Pokemon products actually do super well in Japan. So like pens, folders, plushes, like dining room sets, like sheets, like the amount of products in Japan that feature Pokemon is pretty nuts. And so I think that the popularity of Pokemon in Japan has grown in the last couple years, but it's also Japanese feels like it's doing really well right now, but they're also going to be slower to adjust to the US market. Like right now, we do see a lot of pretty cheap Japanese cards that are available on eBay or PWCC that are selling for cheaper than they are in Japan. And I think it's going to take, 6 months to a year for Japanese prices to start adjusting downwards. They've always been a bit behind in
Mm.
terms of US market movements.
All this is going to be great data for me to like just learn. Like when I see how a lot of this stuff works out, like that's how I view a lot of these things, is like I feel like it's stuff where people, anyone who's just like engaged is going to learn by just kind of watching and seeing how it unfolds over time. It's one of these things where it's going to be like a 2020 hindsight, type situation where it's like, oh, now I get why these have, these types of things. Tyler J says, hey, Jake and Nathan, let's get to some questions and some comments here. So we've been ignoring the chat and there are 1,000. We appreciate the questions and comments. Tyler says, hey, Jake and Nathan, I was watching Pratt's latest video and he was talking about Evolving Skies being in the running for one of the worst sets of 2021. Based on it having such a large set size and amount of chase cards, do you see modern sets with increasingly large set sizes and amount of chase cards affecting their collectability/demand long term? It's an interesting question.
I'm going to say that's incorrect because I'm pretty sure I can find worse sets from 2021. I actually started Googling which sets were released in 2021 as you were reading that question. So it looks
I was
like
thinking one of my least favorite sets is Darkness Ablaze, which I think is a really bad set, but that's not 2021. It's 2020.
So that is 2020. So 2021
Yeah.
is Battle Styles, Chilling Reign, Evolving Skies, Fusion Strike. Those
Everything
four
after
sets.
Vivid Voltage. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess you can also put Shining Fates in there, I believe. Yeah. Shining Fate should be in here. I actually like Evolving Skies quite a bit. I think long-term value is going to be fine. Probably do better than Chilling Reign and Battle Styles. It's not just Evolving Sky that's a massive set. Like Chilling Reign, Battle Styles, every set that has been released has been massive because they've been increasing the size of the Japanese sets, and the English sets always encompass 2 Japanese sets. So like Evolving Skies
before you
was
continue on that point, Nate, I think that just for us, it's like when there are only 4 or 5 sets, you're very close to being the best set when you're the worst. I mean, it's not like we're comparing 100 sets, and so to say like Evolving Skies is one of the worst sets of all time, it's sort of like if you're the middle set this year, yeah, you are one of the worst sets of the year, one of the 3 or 4 worst sets. But sorry, go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, I think long-term Evolving Skies will be probably the best set of 2021. Um, if I had to place a bet. So I guess we'll see. I think single strike and double strike, although it was good for like the TCG in terms of playability,
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of chase, like Urshifu and I can't even remember the other legendary's name, or if they're even legendaries, but they're not very popular Pokemon. And a lot of the alternate arts in that set were subpar. Chilling Reign, again, a great set in terms of playability, but there weren't a ton of chase Pokemon cards in there. So I think short term that, the sets are fine, but
I
long
like
term, I
the gold
think,
Snorlax a lot, and I'm a big Legendary Birds fan, so I like Battle Styles and I like Chilling Reign decently. But yeah, I mean, if I had to pick the 2 worst sets of the year, I would say those. But again, we're picking between 5 sets. It just feels like a
yeah,
stupid. It feels like a stupid conversation. I don't know.
yeah. If I had to pick the best sets of 2021, it would be either Shining Fates or Evolving Skies. I think they
Yeah,
both are gonna do really well long term. So I don't
I,
really agree with what Scott said, I guess.
I just don't think. I think the framing is strange to say that and to me, I think the argument is that English is bad and Japanese is good. It's more of that. It's more of the like English has too big a sets. The construction isn't good. I've heard him say that it's microwave leftovers from Japan, and then Japan set construction is better sometimes, although not always, but smaller sets sometimes, or um, more to the point. I think generally his point, more set identity or better set identity, more consistent set identity. Whereas some of the English sets, they seem to take 2 different sets with 2 different identities in Japan and kind of put them together. Um, it's funny. I don't care that much. I just like opening something that's fun, where there's enough cards I'd really like to pull, where I like the commons and uncommons. I don't feel like it's just garbage. Like it's just, and there's a good variety where there are cards I like to pull at every rarity level. So for me, if they're just good cards at the highest rarity level, I will like opening the set, but there's going to be a lot of like disappointment and annoyance involved in opening that set. But if you have like also really nice looking full arts, which I think this generation has, like I like, for example, we're comparing like the Sun and Moon full arts, which I didn't hate. More people hate those a lot more than I hate them. I don't mind them, but I think they're really often very beautiful um, from this era. To me, it's not just all about the value. Like I like the cards. It's fun. It's fun to open up a cool looking card and add it to my binder. It's enjoyable. Now, one thing I like to say in these discussions is when we are comparing these sets and the prices on all these singles compared to the prices of like all the rainbow rare singles and like the couple secret rares that would have been in a Sun and Moon set, there is so much more value in these Chilling Reign battle styles right now. Like the singles are doing so much better. The fact that you are having a gold Snorlax and then like 4 or 5, alternative art type cards or a full art in there, selling for 20 to $100. That's crazy. I mean, you had sets that didn't have a card over $20 for years, in this raw in the Sun and Moon era. So it's just very interesting. In that era, it was really like the gold energies were the most for a while. And I think a lot of that had to do with the playability. And then you had like the Rainbow Red Charizard, obviously Burning Shadows making a humongous financial splash. Outside of that, right? I mean, what was expensive? And then you had shame, you had playable things, but outside of that, well, that was X and Y. But outside of that, during the Sun and Moon, what was expensive? What was getting over $20? Almost nothing.
Guardians Rising was a great set. It had Darkness and Fairy Secret Rare energies, which were both above. I think Darkness was 35, Fairy was like 40
Yeah.
a lot for most of the time. Tapu Lele.
Yeah,
was
the
I think like
playability.
20, 25 to around like 55, depending on the rarity.
Until it was printed in the promo. Yeah, the those promo boxes, which I bought a bunch of, the
Yeah,
GameStop boxes.
but Guardians Rising was really solid. It also had Gardevoir GX, which was a pretty dominant deck in the meta of Pokemon for quite a bit. So like in terms of like Sun and Moon era sets, like Guardians Rising was by far, I think, the best set. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Even it was Burning Shadows Gardevoir. I get them mixed up. But Guardians Rising and Burning Shadows, those two were standout for Sun and Moon era. Right now, because the sets are larger, I think the singles maintain better value,
There
kind
is that.
of going along to what you said. Um,
Although
but
the amount of alternative arts versus the amount of rainbow rares, how different is that? Because to me, the pull rate on those rainbow rares are one out of every two boxes, right? And there were probably, like, when you think of like the Burning Shadow rainbow rares, like you had the Charizard, right? That got huge amount of money, but like the Salazzle and a lot of those other ones. But if that was an alternative art, it'd be selling for like $40, 35, $40. In the Sun and Moon era, the Salazzle Rainbow Rare was $3 or $4 or $5. I'm just there's a very different amount of collectability right now going on. And now part of it we can argue is the alternative arts are much better looking. People didn't really like the rainbow rares. That's not really the case in terms of like how people felt back then, in my opinion. But I think it's mostly that there's just a lot more collectability. But sure, they're also really cool cards. Like I do want to collect almost all of the alternative arts because they're very good looking. But I like to say that because I want to provide people context, because most of the people talking about invest in these 5 modern sets were not here during those eras
mhm,
and didn't know like what things were selling for. And so there are people who are like panicking that singles are selling between $30 and $100. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying like, these are killing it. Like
yeah.
the amount of collectors, they're doing amazing, you know?
Well, so I will say that one thing you do have to consider with larger sets is that the EV
Yeah.
calculation changes. So like back in the day, it was, relatively consistent for GXs to be $2 bulk,
Mhm.
which, you had a minimum expectation of your EV per box. And since sets were smaller, it was easier to calculate EV. You could expect to hit the average expected value if you open, 18 boxes, which was 3 cases. Whereas now, I think with the larger sets, you have a lot more variance and you have to open a lot more boxes to hit that average expected value. Like if I was gonna bust a set now, I think I would do at least like 5 to 6 cases, and even then you're expecting, there will be cards that you don't hit out of that 5 to 6 cases. So I think it is more risky opening boxes as a store now for singles. And that's what a lot of stores do on release to provide their player base with cards to play with.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I have not sat down and done the math on everything. And back in that time too, like you'd hit like Guzma was very playable. It was like a $3 or something card at one point, and so or $2. And if you got the reverse hollow Guzma, it was $5, and you pull a few of those per, what I mean. So those types of things really added up. I'm not so up to date on like if I open one of these, like how are the trainers doing exactly, and like how much can I sell them, for in my store, like all these little things that would add up. But um, yeah, it was interesting back in the day to watch Darium and other people do these like massive, $1,000, $1,000, 1,000 box openings and see what they would pull and then do the math on it. Let's see. Questions. So, I mean, in terms of, I guess the question being that like, are large sets bad or do we not like large sets? Probably be better if it was like a little smaller, like somewhere in the middle. I mean, somewhere between Champions Path and where the sets are at currently, I guess would be better, but it's not something that I'm extremely bummed about. I enjoy a little like the difficulty of pulling some of these cards, and I enjoy that they're a little bit more special because there aren't that many out there, and I think that I don't know. Maybe I'd rather, if I had to pick, I'd rather them increase the difficulty to pull a card, but have less, and then have a bit easier to pull like the tiers under, and then have like one or two cards that were very, very difficult to pull, like more than 1 out of 72. If type cards, type slots would be interesting, but yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think Pokemon's doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all, as long as you're cognizant of like the differences.
Some people talking about like what matters more, like the popularity of the Pokemon or like the level of rarity, and some people arguing like, are you there, Nate?
When you analyze a set, I think it's.
I'm sorry, you froze on my end, Nate. That's why I was talking for a little bit. Could you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. My internet just dropped for a sec.
Oh, no problem. Were you saying something? When you came back in, you were mid sentence for me. I want to interrupt you.
Oh no, it's fine. I think I heard your question, or the question was whether the Pokemon popularity matters more the rarity.
Yeah, and like I guess to frame the question in an interesting sort of way, or with more specifics, do you go for the $100 alternative art of like the popular Pokemon, or do you buy like the unpopular $20 alternative art? Which one's going to do better? Tell us, Nate, with your magic ball. Like, obviously nobody knows.
Yeah, there's not really a way to answer that question at all. I mean, they both play a part. There's so many factors that go into pricing and supply and demand that you just have to analyze it all and just make your best educated decision. Like, you could put 5 popular Pokemon cards in front of me and 5 rare Pokemon cards, and I may make a different decision depending on which cards you put in front of me. So there's just too many factors to really answer that, other than saying they both play a significant factor into pricing.
Yeah. Yes, that is the answer. Both matter. And when I hear people argue this sometimes, and they're like, it's only this or it's only this, that's where I get into the little bit of like, well, no, there are plenty set collectors who will want all of the alternative arts. And I can tell you, if some of like the less popular Pokemon alternative arts get real low, and yet the really popular ones are hundreds of dollars somehow, I would think that people would buy up a lot of those. These are not going to be cards, because of the difficulty to pull and the rarity of these cards. There is not going to be endless amounts, of these things if Pokemon stays popular. That I see them sitting at $1, $2, $3, like some of the Rainbow Rares did for a little bit. I just don't. I will be a massive buyer at those prices if it ever gets down to that. So I would love it, I guess, selfishly, and for everyone who is still here, we would all get to like own a bunch of cool cards for like $1, $2, $3. But those booster boxes may not be doing too hot if that happens, though. I think, Nate, you might have froze again on my end. Is Nate freezing or am I freezing, guys? Let's see, Nate freezing or am I freezing? Let me know.
Yeah.
Oh, you back now?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're freezing or if I'm freezing.
No, it's me, because I moved in.
Nate is. Okay.
Set up my office, but I'm not like hardwired into like an Ethernet port. So my desktop is just connected to Wi-Fi, which doesn't have the greatest connection.
HW says, Jake, you used to hate on modern a lot in your old videos, saying they will print newer, shinier stuff, that there is more value in vintage. But now you talk positively about modern often. What changed? The price. So, put quite simply, everything that I've said on this channel, I still believe. At the time when I was talking about that stuff, booster boxes were $200 out the gate, and while they were still being reprinted, I don't think a lot of those sets were particularly very good either. And I still very much believe that we have no idea how much Pokemon's printing right now versus how much demand is going to be there in the future. So I would definitely not be going all in on any of this stuff. All of my opinions and everything I said, I believe I probably still agree with. I think it's when you're sort of, when the market dramatically shifts its sentiment, I kind of feel like I've sort of been in the middle or what have you. I guess HEWA, but you can let me know if you feel like I've changed my opinions or my sentiment. Again, I have a humongous amount of rainbow rares, not a humongous, but 300 maybe, something like that I got at about $1 to $3 each, some a little bit more, $4 to $5 each, and I was buying some of them graded for like $11 to $12. At those prices, I like them. At $50, $100 buying in, oftentimes I don't and would prefer the vintage stuff, so it's all price point at the end of the day. Yeah, let's see, Nate's coming back in. And I still do think HEWA that the modern stuff has to compete with new sets, with potentially serialized sets sometime in the future, with new, shinier, brighter, all these types of things, as compared to WotC, which kind of sits by itself, in my opinion. I think the same thing with the modern promos are competing with each other more. So, to a certain extent, obviously, everything competes with everything. So if people can buy modern, really cool, shiny, awesome looking stuff at really, really cheap, and the vintage stuff just goes up and up and up, I do think that people will move from the vintage stuff to those middle eras to the modern. I do think that it all kind of connects. People who tend to be interested in vintage are also interested in modern. Obviously, you're going to have people who are very committed to one or the other, but hopefully that all makes sense to people. I try to give thoughts and feedback that I feel like are valuable and kind of bring people back to sort of a calmer center. Hey, Nate.
Hey, sorry. Wi-Fi died, so I just joined on my phone now.
Sounds good. I was just getting asked, why I sort of talked negatively about modern for a while and why I'm now talking more positively about it or more about opportunity. I was just sort of answering that. Let's see. People having strong opinions here. Let's see. People are arguing. Let's see. I like arguments and opinions. Ooh, a little bit of rudeness here, maybe. Oh yeah, I don't like the calling people clowns so much. It's a great argument when you're just sort of calling someone a clown, and that everything you say isn't legit because you're a clown.
Okay. I'm reading it now.
Yeah, I can't find the beginning of the debate or the argument or whatever, so I'm gonna give up. Okay. Do you want to go to the end of the chat and just have people ask us questions there, or do you want to comb through the middle here?
I'm gonna vote for end of the chat.
Okay. All right, guys, ask your questions at the bottom. We're happy to engage a little bit more with you guys and answer some stuff. Let's see. So Alex, I did see Alex ask this question a bunch of times. What do you think of the 2003 Charmander City Champ, Charmeleon State Champ, and Charizard National Champ from EX Dragon? How rare are they compared to each other? Thoughts, rarity?
Oh, I did see that question earlier. I think he was also asking if they were considered trophy cards.
Okay.
So those are actually just promos given for attending. They're not like given out as prizes or anything. But there are quite a few of the city Charmanders and the state Charmeleons. The Nationals Charizard, there's also a pretty significant amount. Like I have found tournament organizers or people who, judged who have sealed packets of them. I have friends who still have sealed packets of like the Charmanders and whatnot, and they come in.
Like how many? Like what's the most that you've seen in terms of like a hoard that someone had?
Like 200-ish Charmanders.
Okay.
Like sealed packets of them come in 40s. So
okay.
It's not like a set card where, there's tens of thousands of them, but they're by no means like extremely rare. I would say the Charmander, I had to put an estimate, probably like, 5,000 of them, give or take a couple thousand.
You think it's that little? I would have thought it was more, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be significantly more. I don't think they're particularly rare.
What do you think about the charge? Because I would see when I hear 5,000 of something, I think that's pretty rare for Pokemon. I would put that in the fairly rare category, particularly with older stuff that might have a decent amount of like attrition at that point. Brand new stuff that has 5 to 10,000 copies, a lot more of that's going to survive and like be around. But
well, you also have to consider that those were given out as promos, so people are more likely to keep promos than to keep like random set cards. But also there's people who will have sealed positions of them and slowly offload them over time. So personally, I mean, they're definitely not trophies, but there's going to be a decent amount of them out there. For stuff like staff promos for pre-releases and stuff like that, there's significantly less. Even for like tournament staff promos, I mean, you're typically looking like under 1,000 for most of those, but they're not particularly expensive or hard to find for the most part, given the effort. So I think for something that's not extremely popular, 5,000 is a pretty large population. And keep in mind, my 5,000 estimate is just, if I had to throw a dart somewhere on a board, it's probably 5,000, give or take a couple.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely good to hear your general thought on it. Where would you put the Charizard number at?
Maybe like 3,000.
Huh.
And there weren't as many players as we have now, or collectors. Yeah. So the game was just much smaller. Let me pull up the PSA Pop report. I'm curious how many are in them now that we're talking about it.
Yeah, that's always a good place to look, but it's very interesting though, because there are some cards that, I always try and get a sense of like, okay, like what percentage of these types of cards do people generally grade, and then try to like, if I take sort of like a card that was given out this sort of way and I compare it to a lot of other cards that were given out a similar sort of way, to see if, okay, is around 3% graded, 5%, 10% generally graded, and it feels very all over the place. It's like some cards seem like a fairly high percentage are graded. And then I wonder too, it's like, well, when they're giving out in bricks like this, it could just be because there's one or two people out there who just happen to grade everything, versus there's another guy out there who's just who kept it all, sealed or still holding it, and that can like dramatically change the grading population or percentage. What do you find, Nate?
So for Charmander, there's 328 graded. Charmeleon, there's 262, and Charizard, there's 273, and that's total graded.
Yeah.
So I still hold to what I think the estimate is. I think that makes sense. People will grade Charizard much more likely than the Charmander, because Charizard has been at a price point where grading makes sense, whereas Charmander, back in like 2015, 2016, I remember it was around $10 or so. And at that price point, it just wouldn't have been worth grading. So Charmander and Charmeleon are probably more recently worth grading.
It'd be so cool to know how many of like the secret rare Charizard there were versus the stamped promo one. But obviously we have no idea, but it would be interesting to know.
Well, the same Charizard has 709 graded for the non-stamp version.
How many?
759.
Yeah.
So although I won't be able to, tell specific like print run numbers, I think that gives you a fair estimate of stamped versus set.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know. Let
me pull up the chat again.
Sneaker nerd and some people saying we are in the era of junk slabs. You should talk about that. I think we don't know. We don't know really what that means. We don't really know how much is going to come back and if and what's going to be absorbed. So I think for me, if you're talking about secret rares and up, and even like some of your better full arts and up, I'm not sure those are junk slabs. I think when you're talking about like CGC 7, like reverse holo cards, sure. So, but again, I think the term brings up a really important point. And part of why I talked so negatively about all this stuff for a while is because of the level of irrational exuberance in the hobby, saying like everything just goes up in Pokemon, people sending out cards that are worth $3 for $100 grading, these types of things is what I was concerned about and worried about. At this point, these cards are selling for like $7, $6 in auction, $9, $11, $12 in auction. I'm not so super concerned. I honestly, I think that there's good value in that as a collector. Is it going to stonk back up? I don't know. I mean, there's a general pretty decent rule that people don't grade things anymore. And sellers don't grade things anymore if they can at least break even with the 9s and double their money with the 10s, roughly speaking. And so that even if there's a ton of supply, you might see that happen if there's still interest. Now, the other thing is the grading. Is grading gone out of control? And does grading actually add any value, particularly to modern slabs? And for me, I like grade. I still really enjoy graded cards. I care a lot more about the card. My most special cards have nothing to do with the grade. Getting a PSA 10 first edition low pop card means a lot less to me than getting a just absolute rare card in any condition. That card means more to me. It's more fun. It's more exciting. But that doesn't mean that condition rarity doesn't have any value to me. It still has quite a bit of value to me, and it's still fun to chase down. I think when we talk about modern, obviously there's no real rarity in terms of these grades. I think like, again, I'm going to pick on Evolution Charizard. I think PSA 10 Evolution Charizards are such a joke, like the biggest joke, because who cares about a card that they're literally endless amounts, and there's a tiny little white dot, and so you're paying $5,000 versus $20, or when you get into like black labels of these types of things. But what I will say is to each their own, right? If that card, because you came back, this year and you just developed a relationship with the Evolution Charizard, or you love some modern card, and the only way to really make it special or chase for you is to black label it, and you are a collector, I think you're freaking cool and awesome. Like I would never hate on someone's like personal opinion, but I also like have an opinion on this stuff. And that, that is my opinion, that I just think I think that to me is like the jumping the shark, a little bit of the mania when we look at the premiums. And particularly when I have PSA 10 cards, I have black labels, I have CGC 10s that are all I would grade them at all sorts of different grades. And, so what do you think, Nate?
I think it depends on how you define junk slabs. You can either define it by the value of the slab, like is a junk slab if it, sells for less than the grading fee, or by the card that is graded. And personally, the way that I define it is the card that's graded. Like there are a lot of people who sent in, bulk cards that are 3 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents to get graded. And I think those are classified as junk slabs. I think we will be seeing a decent amount come back, but the majority of cards, I think, will be fine. I do expect to see PSA, CGC, BGS prices for like a lot of the cheaper things be relatively low, like the baby shinies, anything that is just widely available. But I think those will recover over time. Whereas, things like the guy who, this is kind of an inside joke, but, grading a Trubbish, I don't necessarily know that that'll do well super long term if you graded, 10 of them.
Yeah, and when I look at the baby shinies, to me, recovering means $3 to $4 raw. And with a $25 PSA PSA CGC price for a graded and very high condition, that to me, that is recovering. And that's what I think is very likely to happen eventually. It's not a do I think it has a chance to go to $200? These types of things, not raw, but it's like graded PSA 10. If that goes to $200, you will see a massive explosion in all other prices. There's always a chance because huge spikes of demand can happen. And they are limited, even though there aren't so many of these things. But, that would require just a tremendous, like I would much more expect to 10x my money on my trophy cards long term than I would something like that happen, where I would more predict the high end, the richer people having more and more money and expendable income and interest to buy those items and then compete and watch those kind of go up. Then I would expect a humongous amount more of just like casual kind of, people who can afford more $50 to $100 to $200 cards push those cards up to like $200 from $10, if that makes sense for people. But both could happen, and I don't know.
Yeah, so I think that a healthy place in the market would be, taking like a $5 card, spending, $10 or $20 to grade it and selling it for, maybe 10 or 20% profit. I think that is a healthy place because what you're providing is kind of a service for convenience, especially because those cards aren't particularly rare or hard to purchase raw. Whereas in the past couple years, we've seen this huge premium for people who have graded things beforehand and already had it in hand. People were paying, hundreds of dollars for that premium. So I think we're getting back to a healthy place. I think we have overcorrected a little bit with some of like the slab auctions on PWCC. Part of that is also just too many things listed. Like a lot of people are offloading, whether that's eBay or
it's not that complicated, right? So we have a humongous amount of people who don't really care about this, over leverage themselves, graded stuff that they shouldn't have, who just want to get out. And if you're going to be here long term and you value this stuff and have the capital to deal with it, it's not rocket science. It's like, now is a good time. Like those are the types of scenarios you look for as a person who does have the interest, who believes in it, who sees the value long term to buy some of these things, and again, it's not it's a understanding the moment and taking advantage of the moment. So I've been waiting for this moment for a year and a half. And that's why I'm, and now again, I've already seen an uptick in prices on all the things I've been buying. So, I'm still buying. There was a month period where I won every single auction that I bid on almost. And I wasn't talking about it yet because I didn't want to create competition for myself. I wish I had never talked about any of this stuff, honestly. And I don't know how much reach or impact I have, but I could just impact, like, there could be 5 people who have a lot of money and time and energy. And now I could be just competing against those 5 people. You know what I mean? Like, that's what people don't understand. It's very easy to uptick prices on these types of things, or with just a few people interested, or having that demand now. But yeah, I mean, it's that PWCC auction that I went through, and I bought, hundreds of things. And then, I probably bought 1,000 to 2,000 or so slabs during this period, that I feel very confident that I got them at an extreme bargain. I think even now, if I were to sell them, I wouldn't be able to sell them all immediately, but if I sold them slowly, I would double my money immediately, at least just in this market right now. And I think I would be able to sell them, maybe even triple my money in some cards. A lot of that, though, is just patience, auctions, getting good deals. I love that stuff. It's fun for me. It's not necessarily like the best time value in the world. So there's a reason why, like, Nate and like some other people may not do that, but more for me.
Yeah. I was actually going to say that, like, if you enjoy it, then it's really good. But for me, like, the time it would take to sit down and actually process it and then resell it, it's just not worth it.
And for me, it's like, I like the sort of, I like having, because I want to create a very large collection. I want to do this for the rest of my life, ideally, and just kind of be engaged in learning for the rest of my life. I want to have, decent amounts of each sort of thing at prices that I feel good about, so that it gives me flexibility in the future to sell certain things, to buy new things. It's sort of how I've always operated. I kind of set a price points that I think are good for certain things. And, everything has a price point. Every card that is at least a baby shiny or better has a price point that I will buy it at. Anything below that is just a pass for me. But it will be funny if one day, Nate, like, we start seeing like regular hollows, start to sell, even from this generation, start to be like $5 each. That'll be interesting, $10 each. And then we go back and we into our bulk binders. But obviously it would take a lot of time, a lot of attrition, and a much bigger hobby, with things much, much more expensive for the hobby to make that sort of leap into those cards.
Yeah, I will say everything does have a price. Even the bulk hollows from modern sets, they still bulk off. When I first started the hobby, with all of them, I used to buy common, uncommon bulk. I'd sort through it for things that, had playability that I could sell. And if you have a ton of time, like, that is actually a very good way to make money, because you can buy, 1K of bulk for, $20 to $40, depending on the current market rate. And you can pick through it, and you can usually find, $10 to $20 of singles that you can sell that are playable on top of bulking off the rest to, like, a bigger fish, like, troll and toad or whatnot. But the current way that I function is I leverage other businesses that are better at doing certain jobs than I am, or more efficient. So, like, I don't really touch anything that's under $25 for myself. If it's under 25, I'll send it to someone else to sell for me, and they can make their percentage. They have, employees in place, and they are more efficient in the way that they handle orders and pack orders. So I don't really deal with anything in that lower range anymore. And that's just like a personal decision. I just ran out of time. So
Yeah, I love the lower range because I'm a hoarder. And having like 1,000 slabs, just, oh my God.
how would you like
What?
how would you like 1,000 more?
Well, Nate and I talked about me buying him out, not super, super seriously, but buying him out of his just massive, massive hoard, and what price that would cost a bet.
It was buy all of my slabs and you get a finalist 06 finalist trophy card.
Yes, I want that card. It's worth it. It's worth it to drown in those slabs.
The offer still stands. You can make a bed or throne.
Yeah, nah, I don't want those slabs that much. It's a little bit much. You have a little more than I want. If I could comb through and pick like the 1,000 that I wanted, I would do it for sure.
Yeah,
all right.
Then everything else.
Yeah, I would leave you with just the bottom half of the stuff you don't even want. How does that sound?
There's always someone in the world that wants it.
Let's see. Questions. Pick out anything or any comment or anything that looks interesting to you.
I think it's mostly discussions right now.
Nice. How about going till 10? Does that work for your schedule? And then we'll call it a night. It's like 24 more minutes. Is that too much time?
That's fine with me.
That's good. Okay. Sounds good.
And just to clarify, I don't hate on Trubbish. That it was more of just an inside joke.
Is someone upset with you in the chat?
A couple people are apparently.
There's a team Trubbish.
Is it really?
Yeah. I don't know if they're here. I didn't see them, but
yeah, I actually have a bet with a close friend that he won't sell his Trubbish for I think $40 or $50.
Panicked Peacock says, Jake and Nate, what was the first card you guys bought when getting back into the hobby? Do you remember?
Bought a collection. It was, God, I don't even remember what was in it. But I remember, so I came from Yu-Gi-Oh! And I actually was kind of tired of the community back then. So I sold my Yu-Gi-Oh! Collection and decided to look for something else. And that's how I found Pokemon. So there was someone at my local store that was, getting out of Pokemon. So I bought his collection for around 50%. And, I basically started to learn and look at different cards. But to begin with, I would only buy collections. I didn't buy any singles. So
for the first couple of months, all I did was buy booster boxes and open them. And then I think my first like big purchase of a card was the Blaine's. I bought a PSA 10 first edition Blaine's Charizard, which was like one of my favorite cards, if not my favorite card from when I was a kid. I bought it for $225. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I spent $225 on a Pokemon card. Times have changed in my head, which is scary. That's how these things work. But I remember being like, am I a complete moron for spending $225 on a Pokemon card? And when it came, I was so happy and I loved it. I pretty quickly got over the buyer's remorse, which I had a little bit of. And then I started buying collections. for sure. That's where I went next. Bought a bunch of modern collections, made a bunch of mistakes, or just like bought stuff that like wasn't in great condition, and then I just had like a bunch of damaged bulk and other things that stunk, and then I just got better and better at identifying, collections that I would enjoy, collections that part of what was so fun about buying collections was a little bit of the mystery and the excitement of what you might get, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I saw Black Rose Collectibles.
I'll be done in like 20 minutes.
But I did want to say though that I do think that coming into the hobby, buying collections at like a very low percentage is good. So like 40 to 60%, give or take, because it does give you more room for error on your end. So some things
I always suggest buying booster boxes and opening for fun, and then buying collections of both modern and vintage just to see what you like. It's a really good way to start. And then, starting with some of those binder collections. And then, if there are some cards that you just really, really love, maybe going into the graded scene. I do think that the graded scene and all this stuff is not for everyone. And what I don't want, like, I love graded cards and really enjoy them, but I do think it's important, for people not to get caught up in that, and to make sure, like, maybe because it's cheaper to just do binders. So to see if you just prefer that and you don't really like graded cards and that's not really your thing, I think is another important thing to consider and look into. You don't have to own graded cards to be have a really cool, awesome Pokemon collection. But I don't know, graded cards for me, Zach, who I'm going to have on the channel soon, again, Gem Mint, watching him just try to complete those 10 sets, I was hooked immediately. I was like, yep, that's me. that's what I want to do. That's my goal too.
Yeah, I like Zach a lot. Graded cards is interesting because it's a very Pokemon thing.
Yeah.
Sports and Pokemon. Most other hobbies, like even nowadays, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic is not very heavy and graded.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of the value is still in the raw cards, and you don't see a ton of premium. Same with Weiss. So graded has definitely been more of like a sports and Pokemon thing, and it is leaking into other hobbies. I personally, I don't care too much for graded cards. It as something to invest in, I think it's fine. But for my personal collection, whether it's a 9 or a 10 doesn't really bother me too much, unless I'm trying to finish like a collection goal, like get a set of something in 10.
So HGW is asking, just to follow up on what he asked me earlier about, it seems like nothing in the market has drastically changed regarding modern that would have changed the way you operate around it. So I'm buying lots of cards like this. Here's a 9.5. This is really nice card. It really looks like a 10, PSA 10. I think I bought this for $11 or $12. This card, when Hidden Fates first came out and when Shiny GX in a PSA 10 was going for $30. So this is what I'm talking about is like there are sets right now, like Hidden Fates, like there are other sorts of things where you're seeing cards now. And this is another example of like, well, it's a Stack Attacker, it's not a Charizard, I still think it's a really, really cool card. I really like Hidden Fates. I really like these full art cards. Like that type of buy for me at that price. If this was 5, 6, 8 a year ago, this card's going for 50, 60, 70, $80. Now I'm buying it for 1/8 the price. So there's been a dramatic price change in a lot of these cards. Part of it is CGC, right? Lots of people graded with CGC. People are not buying these CGC slabs like they're buying PSA slabs. I would never have got this for like that $11, $12 price point if it was in a PSA 10. The PSA 10 probably would have gone for, like, in this market, would have gone anywhere between like 20 and 40 right now. 20 would be like a real steal for this. Probably 40 would be like, closer to market or what a seller would expect. Now, people are binning these cards right now at quite a bit higher, but in auctions, you're able to snag some of these cards here and there. That did not exist. Trust me, I was looking a year and a half ago. There weren't those opportunities that. So that's just to give a little bit of a specific example, and I have 1,000 or so slabs that I would say are roughly, not all as good as that, potentially, or that I feel is strong about that. There's some that I feel stronger. And I've also bought collections of slabs and different things where I made a deal with someone who just wanted to liquidate all their slabs for even less than that, so.
Yeah. There was a question concerning Yu-Gi-Oh! From Black Rose something. Black Rose Collectibles.
Sure.
He said he was wondering how either of us feel about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Market. He's been buying vintage and mid-era Japanese chase cards for his collection, and he thinks that it's a great value. I can say quite a bit about Yu-Gi-Oh! Do you have any opinions on?
I'm looking for the question. Say it one more time for me.
Let me actually just copy and paste it.
I can go first before this person who actually knows things about Yu-Gi-Oh! I can then give the space for Nate, who's a lot more knowledgeable.
I posted it at the bottom of chat.
Okay. I heard Nate mention Yu-Gi-Oh! Earlier and was wondering how either of you feel about the market. I've been buying vintage and mid-era Japan chase cards for my collection, and it seems like great value. Yeah, so I don't know. I talked to, friend of the channel, friend of mine, Rainy Day Collectibles, about some of the stuff sometimes. He's very bullish on a lot of this. There seems to be a lot of good opportunity from people who I think are engaged in this, although people are realizing that. But there's a lot, generally speaking, from my understanding and from sort of my limited firsthand experience, there's a lot of ungraded stuff all over, but both English and Japanese still out there. There's a lot more of that opportunity buying collections and buying really like gradable collections than there is in Pokemon. A lot of that Pokemon supply, I think, was bought up and graded this year. I think there's more of that in Yu-Gi-Oh! From my understanding. But let's actually hear from, someone who I would listen to over myself. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah. So with Yu-Gi-Oh! It's quite different from Pokemon in the way that the game works. I guess to give like a really quick summary, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an evergreen format, which means that any card that was ever printed can be played short of a ban list of cards that changes typically every 6 to 9 months. So you have cards that could be, 50 cents one day turn into a $10 card the next day because some new support comes out that synergizes with some old card that you had in bulk. So the way that you treat Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a little bit different. By far, most of the value is in English, like highest rarity. The other thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Versus Pokemon is you will have a single card that's printed 5 or 10 times in different sets, in different rarities. And the same card with the same art could be worth, $1,000 and 50 cents at the same time, just because, for instance, an ultimate rare, which is the equivalent of like, let's see, it would be close to like a secret rare or like a hyper rare equivalent for Pokemon. Those tend to be the more expensive ones, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Will release newer rarities that will change kind of like your tier ranking of whatever card you're looking at. So one of the reasons that English is the most expensive language is because in terms of playability, which drives the Yu-Gi-Oh! Market, English is used for tournaments, and even for like tournaments in Europe. If you go to Worlds, you can use English, but using like German, for instance, is a lot harder. There are even people in Japan, like stores. I know there is a store, I can't remember the store's name, but the owner's name is Kyojin. He has a store in Japan that only sells English Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. And they sell at a huge premium because that's the demand for playing internationally. And he sponsors like international players. Japanese is really good for finding good values if you just want to collect the art or certain rarities, because Japan has many more printings of cards than America. So for instance, America typically has a new set every 3 to 4 months, prints, and they will do like reprint sets once a year, twice a year, like the gold tins, which is like what's the equivalent in Pokemon? Best of XY in Japanese would be a similar equivalent, which gold tins just print cards that are relevant in terms of playability that have gotten too expensive. And so Yu-Gi-Oh does like reprint sets like these, where you can pick up art for very cheap. And I think as a collector, that's great, but most of the value comes from playability. And I think I just like kind of went off topic and ranted for quite a long time, but
No, that's good.
there are really unique things in Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh! Like there's prize cards or certain rarities that are available only in Japan, or specific art printings, like similar to Sabrina's Gengar in English, where it doesn't have like the tombstones, whereas the Japanese printing for Pokemon has the tombstones. A lot of the English cards are also censored for Yu-Gi-Oh!
I thought about picking up one of those. I think we were both watching it, Nate. And I think we talked that night, but there was on Heritage not too long ago, there were a bunch of trophies that came up. And I was thinking about picking one up. But yeah, I just didn't feel like I have the confidence in it. Because I just don't feel like I have been in that community and have talked with people enough and I'm engaged and I just don't quite like them enough. Like I really like them, but I'm very much, don't buy something because it's expensive or because other people like it. Buy something because you really like it and you've spent the time and energy and effort to understand like why other people like it and why it'll probably retain value. So that's a little bit where I'm at with that sort of world. But I definitely interested in learning. But for me, I've been getting more into some other things. But it's
yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh is a fascinating market to watch. Just because it's so different from the Pokemon market. I could go on about it for ages, but I think that was enough of a rant for now. We have probably time for one more question.
Even says that Nathan rants are the best thing in this hobby. Thanks for the knowledge. Yes. Yeah, Nate is very knowledgeable. I go to him on. He's my first stop on definitely Weiss questions at this point. My first stop, but I love running things by him. Do I collect the Bandai Sealed Ass cards? I do. Yeah, I collect both the Bandai Sealed Ass and also the what are they called? I forget what they're called, but the like the 1998 ones. The Sealed Ass ones are like those sticker ones. I don't like those quite as much, but I'm definitely a fan. Do you like those, Nate?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, I muted myself because my keyboard is super loud. I think, but yeah, there are quite a few like older Yu-Gi-Oh prints. Bandai did a couple different series. Like one series is like sticker cards. They have the Sealed Ass. They have also trophies for that. So for Bandai Yu-Gi-Oh, there's the Gate Guardian, Swords of Revealing Light, and Mirror Force. And I think
a lot of fakes. Be careful. A lot of fakes of those.
Yeah, I think the hollows are pretty hard to fit. At least I haven't seen any fakes of the hollows.
Oh, I've had a lot of fakes. Like a surprising, like I bought a lot of collections of those and I knew that they were fake when I bought them. Like I didn't pay up for them, but there's a surprising, I've seen a lot of fakes. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. Like, and this is something I tried to ask someone who I thought would know. He doesn't speak the best English, so it was like a little bit hard. But I think like what I got was some understanding of that people, they weren't necessarily trying to like swindle people. It was more for people would just kind of very cheaply like scan it or print it in, so that they would have like a cheap version that they could put and play with and have around, and then they'd have like keep their expensive version separate. But yeah, just be careful. Like I would be careful if you're not experienced in that. and or obviously buying them already like PSA graded. A lot of them are graded, but those are very expensive. Those also like the TA1, TA2. I forget what's the name of that one. Do you remember?
Not off the top of my head.
Honestly, guys, it's been a while since I've like looked at these.
Oh, are you talking about? I think the TA1 or TA2. It's the alternate art original tournament prize cards, like from the second tournament. Blue Eyes Ultimate, Red Eyes Summon Skull, Gemini Elf.
No,
There's
no,
one-
I'm talking about the ones. The TA1 and the TA2 are from the 1998 Bandai set, and it's like I have them somewhere. Whatever. People don't need this knowledge. Way too niche. I can look it up quickly if you want. I can send it to you, Nate.
It's fine. I think I know what. Oh, the ones that piece together the Blue Eyes Ultimate.
There's the piecing together ultimate, which are very common or quite common, and then there's the other one, the TA2, I believe, which is actually not as rare as those other ones, but is decently rare and is very difficult to find in good condition. I've been struggling to find it for a while, but I forget. It has like chains on it. I forget what it's called, but
I have my set, but I completed my set a long time ago, so I haven't really invested in the Bandai cards. But I do like a lot of the older English Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm very nostalgic towards those, so I have full sets of a lot of them.
Is this Medizu Games actually Mike, or is this an imposter?
I have no idea.
The chat. I think it might be an imposter tonight. Let's see. Okay. I think we have time for just like maybe like 1-2 more quick questions.
Mason says it is Mike from Medizu.
It is. It's a different picture. Okay. It's me for reals. Okay.
Careful if you buy Korean Yu-Gi-Oh! Someone in chat is talking about it, but Korean Yu-Gi-Oh! Does not really have any value.
How could you say that, Nate? You just put a dagger into my heart. The way Korean Yu-Gi-Oh! Works is that the majority of the sets are printed over and over and over again. They may never stop printing LOB in particular, but they do retire some of the sets occasionally, and you'll see the booster box prices jump from like $20 up to $50 up to $100 for some of those sets, like Pharaoh's Servant, for example. Korean Yu-Gi-Oh! Is meant and hopefully forever will be $20. I'm hoping those boxes stay $20 forever, and that it can just be a fun way to open vintage. That is my genuine hope. But it's a little bit of a meme, but I do always go back to it when people tell me like, what should I buy for fun? I always say that.
Yeah, I mean, I have some boxes of like sets that I do enjoy in Korean that I'll open just for fun, like Light of Destruction and Phantom Darkness, stuff that you can't find in English. But they are definitely like pre-pandemic, they were like $10 a box. Some of them were like $7 or $8. And the pandemic has spiked a couple to like 20 or 30, but Korean Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty much worthless.
It's the most worthwhile thing, and you should put all of your money into it, is what Nate's trying to say. And I agree with him. Very good analysis. Okay, guys. I think we're going to end it there. Nice to see you all. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming on, Nate.
Yep.
we look forward to when you start a channel, whenever that is. Or I guess, do you have a channel and you're just not running it seriously? I forget.
I do have a channel. I haven't posted a video yet. I actually
So
just
definitely go subscribe to that channel because there's a lot of great content over there.
there will be, hopefully. But I'm actually planning on filming my first video later this week and hopefully getting something
Nice.
up maybe next week or by the end of this week.
Nice. Well, hopefully we can give you a bit of a boost out of the gate and help you grow over there. Thank you for coming on, man, as always. And yeah, any last minute words of advice? Do you want to, like, what should people do right now, you know, with their money? Where should they spend it? How do they become rich and happy and successful in life?
I think that depends a lot on personal value.
Right.
If you're just trying to increase your money,
I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
subscribe.
Any last word for real, Nate?
I hope everyone has a good time. Stay safe in these times, and hopefully, you know, the world gets less chaotic and we can have some events. I would love to have another Pokemon Worlds that we get to travel to, do some meetups and stuff like that.
For sure. Sounds good, man. All right. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again soon.